Close your eyes for a second and imagine two colossal titans getting ready to go head to head in an octagon. On the left, you've got the United States, a country forged, born and bred from rebels who gave a standing ovation with their tallest finger to the King of England. On the other side, you've got the Russians, forged in the cold of Siberia. Surprise, surprise, neither one of these two are going to back down very easy. And in this video, we're going to dive into what would actually happen if Russia and the United States went head to head in a world war. It's about to get real. We're going to unravel the intricate web of strategies, deception, diplomacy, economics, and all the different things that would make the entire world walk the razor's edge if this conflict were about to happen, while it was happening, and what the aftermath would look like. Because at the end of the day, there's going to be razor's edge decisions that could happen during a conflict like this that would literally change the world as we know it based on one decision. And we're going to dive into those now. So obviously the world has its own identity, but in between those identities, you've got superpowers. Russia is on the brink of potentially being a superpower. That's debatable. I'm sure you'll let me know if you'd like to debate that in the comments. The United States, definitely a superpower, and now we've got China rising up into superpower status. But Russia and the United States going head to head would be as close to superpowers as we would probably get. And that is going to be a wild conflict. Let's talk about some flashpoints and powder kegs that have happened before that are going to lead us to understand what is most likely going to happen in a future conflict should these two colossal titans hammer it out. First, we're going to talk about 1962 and the Cuban Missile Crisis. This is when Russia decided, hey, I think it would be a good idea to place nuclear weapons in Cuba. We're going to poke the eagle, if you will. But hey, the bear has been poked before too, and we'll get to that in a second. But they essentially positioned multiple nuclear weapons in Cuba, and it brought the world to its knees. The entire world was essentially on the brink of nuclear war on a standoff that was happening just 90 miles off the coast of Florida. Just wild. And that 13-day standoff of the Cuban Missile Crisis just shows how something like that can bring the world to the brink of nuclear war, essentially in the snap of a finger. And then we got to talk about NATO's expansion. So the fact that NATO is expanding into Eastern European nations just makes Russia nervous. Now, I'm not justifying anything that King Putin might be doing over in Russia, but he's definitely nervous based on NATO's expansion into countries that he probably never theorized would ever become parts of NATO. And that's countries like Poland, the Baltic states, and later even Montenegro and North Macedonia. They all joined NATO. Russia viewed this as a strategic encroachment, and that just stoked the fears of a nation who has leaders that are already relatively paranoid. And the Berlin crisis goes back decades, where the US had to perform the Berlin airlift in 1948 to 1949, where they airlifted supplies into Eastern Germany. In 1961, the Berlin Wall was erected, and that essentially increased tensions between the US and Russia on a scale that had never been seen before, and kicked off the Cold War up until the point of the USSR falling and the Berlin Wall falling as well. The tensions aren't just things that have happened in the past. There are modern day flashpoints that are getting ready to potentially kick off into the powder keg, which could create this situation. Now, obviously, the goal of this entire video is to avoid those, but we got to talk about them. And one of the biggest one is the Arctic disputes. There is a ton of territory, that's a technical term, up in the Arctics, which is disputed by Russia and other nations. Now, this is becoming incredibly important because as the world warms up, there's more shipping lanes up there. As ice breaks up and doesn't reform as strong as perhaps it once did, as Earth goes through its natural cycles, there's more of an ability for commercial shipping and military uses to take place in the Arctic, and potentially being able to tap resources that were unreachable before. So of course, this is going to be a chunk of land that Russia and the US and other Arctic nations are going to want to get their hands on. And then cyber warfare, throwing out a shameless plug. I've got a cyber warfare specific video. If you want to check that out, that would be exciting for me. It literally gives me the tingles right now. But in the digital age, espionage has literally just taken on its own digital signature, where espionage doesn't need to be performed in person as much anymore, although it still is. But now digital warfare is reaching a scale where Russia can create massive farms of hacktivists and hackers that can go in and try to disrupt key US infrastructure, and the US can do the same to Russia. And then this discussion wouldn't be complete with the flashpoint of proxy wars. Good old proxy wars. Why can't we get rid of these things? So in Syria, there's a civil war, and Russia has been supporting the side of the established government, which is the President Assad. The US has been supporting counter movements, which are trying to dethrone Assad. Some of those are guerrilla movements, some of those are rebel movements, but hey, the US, again, bred and born from a rebellious nature. When we see the ability to create democracy and increase freedom, it's just kind of hard for us not to try to encourage that around the world. And that's what we're doing in Syria. We're trying to create a regime that isn't based on tyranny, that isn't based on a dictatorship. So of course we're going to clash with a nation like Russia that essentially has an oligarch, Putin, running the entire nation. So that is a big flashpoint that if something were to happen over there, let's say an F-15E and a Su-35, story might come out a little bit later, got in a clash on the border because they were flying on the wrong side, and it turned into a hot shooting war between 4th or 5th gen aircraft, that could escalate and create a situation where now there's a larger conflict on the table. And you know I'm going to talk about Ukraine, and in 2014, the USSR, Russia, however you want to say it, the Russian Federation, they ended up annexing Crimea, which is where one of their main naval bases was. But now, in this new conflict, in recent days, as of this video being made, it's happening right now, there's a conflict going on where Russia is trying to take more and more of Ukraine, and essentially, they want to take all of Ukraine. The US is stepping in and saying, no, we want to try to encourage civilization that has similar values to the United States. Again, it's one of those things that we've got the clash of the titans going head to head. So this is a proxy war that could boil over into something bigger. Hopefully it doesn't. Don't worry. I don't want it to either, but we gotta talk about it. Now we gotta talk about the war machine, so the duel of the titans. So we've done everything we can to avoid this war, right? But hey, here we are. Let's talk about the war machine and what would actually be happening on both sides to make this happen. Air superiority would be basically the #1 priority for both nations, and the US would be sending up fleets of potentially unmanned stealth drones, F-22 fighters, the shining star of the air superiority world. Always had to pretend like it was better than the F-15. How dare you, F-22? The US would also be sending up F-35s, which have some of the best situational awareness of any fighter jet that I've ever researched or heard of or talked to pilots that have flown it. So that would be the infrastructure backbone of the US attempt to achieve air superiority. And I think they would be going up against a lot of 4th generation fighters from Russia. Russia would be putting up Su-30s, Su-33s, Su-35s, Su-57s potentially, but there's only 4 to 10 or so working Su-57s, which are essentially like a Gen 4.5 aircraft for Russia. So going up against an F-22, it's not really going to be a matchup at all, or an F-35, but the Su-57 could be a formidable matchup for like an F-15 or an F-16. So if there was a region where air superiority was trying to be established by an F-16 and they're going up against a Su-57, that F-16 is going to have a run for its money, and the F-15C potentially a run for its money as well. F-15EX, now you're kind of looking at a similar matchup with the Su-57 and F-15EX, but at the end of the day, both nations are going to send up their shining stars to try to get air superiority as soon as possible. Whoever gets air superiority first and maintains it, I don't care what you say, that is a nation that is going to dominate the rest of the conflict. I mean, unless things go nuclear, in which case all bets are off the table. So now we got to talk naval dominance. The US is going to focus on aircraft carriers, which project power essentially around the globe. It's like you can't shake them. Hey, you try to shake them, you try to go to this part of the world, you try to go to this region, you can't get rid of these aircraft carriers because they are projecting power and air superiority in places that you might not ever think that the US could establish it there. So these aircraft carriers are going to be there, like the USS Gerald R. Ford aircraft carrier. That's going to serve as essentially like a mobile airbase that's going to be out there crushing it, just throwing AMRAAMs, throwing AIM-9Xs at the enemy and establishing air superiority. But Russia's naval fleet is nothing to shake a stick at, and they're not going to go down easy at all. Remember, forged in the cold of Siberia. How many times do I have to say it? But they're not really going to go at the US with their surface fleet because they really can't compete at all in a surface arena for the most part, right? You never want to underestimate them, but their bread and butter is going to be their submarine fleet. They're going to try to sneak those subs in strategically take out aircraft carriers, take out other key infrastructure with submarines, and essentially place those subs in places where they could launch intercontinental sub-based missiles from those subs. The Russians would also be operating warships like the Admiral Gorshkov, and that's designed to operate effectively in regional theaters around the globe. And then the next thing is land warfare. So the US is going to come at it with their main battle tanks like the M1A1 Abrams, and they're going to focus on a rapid deployment of forces. Keep in mind, the US Army is built to be extremely fast and extremely swift. They want to be able to respond to a massive conflict within 48 hours or less. So that's really going to put the US at the leading edge. Getting the US's troops into position, and they're already going to be a lot of them already in position, is going to be one of the strengths of the US. Russia's going to come back at the US with a T-14 Armata tank, and that's going to lead Russia's armored divisions, and that's going to be complemented by a vast array of artillery and mechanized infantry. And then both nations are going to try to protect strategic points, infrastructure, choke points, things like that. The US is going to really rely on its Patriot missile batteries, and then Russia is going to focus on its S-400 and S-500. That's kind of the Russian version of the Patriot missile, so things are going to get real. And then you got to think of nuclear deterrence, but this is going to be really based on the MAD doctrine. That's probably the biggest thing that's going to keep the US from going to the brink of nuclear war. Mutually assured destruction is the MAD doctrine, and that is what is said, and psychologically you can probably already understand what I'm saying, knowing that if you launch, you are going to be destroyed as well. That's going to make you think twice. You might say, maybe we should just hang out. Maybe we should just have a little beverage, sit back, and chat about this before we both destroy each other. That is the MAD doctrine, and that ideally is what's going to keep nuclear weapons in their silo. For watching, guys, don't forget, there's going to be a follow-on video to this called Nuclear Deterrence and how it all works, how it would play out, how the US and Russia would basically try, or the world would try, to prevent the US and Russia from going to war. Having these two colossal titans battle, while it might be awesome in a UFC ring, I say we just send up the US's president and Putin. The comments are going to go wild after that one, but basically just two people battle it out instead of nuclear war. And that's what the next video about nuclear deterrence is going to be about. It should pop up somewhere over here. If you don't want to watch that one, hey, you know what? It's a free country. You watch whatever you want, or I hope you're in a free country, bottom line. So click on one of these videos over here, check those out. That would mean a lot to me, and I'll see you on the next video.